Okay, Flavio and John, how are you both?
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeff. How are you?
I'm great.
Very well, Jeff. Thank you.
Nice to have you both on the show. It's an experiment where we're going to have the three of us chatting for a little bit. And I know that both of you are really intimately involved in this fascinating tech commercialization business called ECove. So over the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk about that and how you've been able to kind of help fill the gap between the lab and commercialization and the marketplace. I guess you've done about, 10 of these companies so far?
That's correct.
Awesome. And so we'll talk about the people part of that specifically. But before we get to that, let's just kind of set up for the listeners, how a venture developer model kind of works. So perhaps one of you could just for 60 seconds, just kind of describe at a very high level how ECove works.
John, you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah. So Jeff, ECove works on technology commercialization, and we call ourselves venture developers because we're trying to highlight the hands-on nature of our program and work. Commercialization is not a new topic or subject, but we go into the lab and we create a partnership with a lot of these stakeholders. So the research institutions, the inventors, the researchers themselves, and we create a company around the intellectual property that's been developed over years of investment and obviously work in the lab. And so we come in as founders with them and really drive that business from A to Z.
So they have a product or a technology, probably perhaps patented, and you, both of you and your team work with them to commercialize it and bring it to the marketplace.
That's correct.
So let's give a real life example, if you can, of one that's kind of went through that process and briefly tell us kind of where it came from and now what's the status of it.
So let me take that, Jeff. So our first graduate of the startup nursery is a company called Nicola Labs, and Nicola is a spinoff of the Ohio State Electroscience Labs. It's one of the leading labs of its kind in the world. And the way we really look at things is through a top-down, macro view. And one of the key themes that we have in the nursery is the advent of IoT, the Internet of Things, and how all these sensors are going to be tethered all over, in our day-to-day life. And, what we call smart X, smart homes, smart cities, smart buildings, smart vehicles. And really with that, it creates opportunities, but also, problems on how to implement that strategy. One of the key problems here is how are you going to power all these sensors? Because in most cases, they cannot be, really, you cannot run wires or, batteries because you just create a massive maintenance problem. So Nicola Labs is a company, like I said, that's focused on a core technology that converts radio frequency energy into direct current to power these low power sensors. So it's a leading company in that field.
Got it. And so it's actually commercialized and you're now out selling to customers.
Yes, we're in the process of our first vertical has been on the industrial IoT space, and we're now installing systems in some of the leading manufacturing plants in the United States and expanding to Asia shortly as well.
Got it. Now, I know in the pre-interview you mentioned that the ECove team is about 15 people in this nursery, so to speak, the startup nursery. I love that term. What is the mix of those people? Are those more business types? Or are they more technologist or legal, or what's the mix?
You should touch it, it's exactly that. It's very mixed. We have like our co-founders, Dr. Rob Lee and Rodolfo Pelazzi. These are two, technologists. Dr. Lee was a chair of the electrical and computer engineering department at Ohio State, and Rodolfo has a master's in electrical engineering. Our other partner, David Moritz, is a attorney by training, but went back to school and took an engineering degree, and it's very focused on legal and IP. We have groups that are focused on accounting. We have people like myself that are focused on finance and more of the asset raising, and John, that focus also on the biz dev and kind of managing the early stage of different companies.
Got it. What is it would strike me that if you're going to recruit people and put them together as a team, that in turn kind of gives birth to other teams, that those people would have to have a very unique DNA, right? So
right.
What have you codified that DNA or put certain words around it? Because I'm guessing there's a lot of people that probably wouldn't fit in an environment like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it goes back to the original partnership where we are getting into business with inventors and researchers that have a mind for commercialization, that understand really their role. And so they can fulfill maybe a CTO or continued development role within the business, but understand that they're not going to lead that business through, industry and through the market. And so that's a first key element to the business, where we partner with like-minded individuals that kind of know their value add to each phase or facet of the business.
Almost an assembly line type of mentality.
Yes.
Got it. What types of people don't fit in to an environment like that? In other words, what kind of DNA would someone have that would just kind of conflict with that kind of mindset?
I think you need people that are very flexible. I think people that are used to a set structure, they tend to suffer in this environment. I mean, this is a very entrepreneurial and structure. So, you require, really people that in the early days, even though they may have tremendous background, but you're going to be doing, pretty much everything, right? So, those functions, they blurred very quickly. There's
a lot of fluidity to it.
Exactly.
So where did you learn to hire people like that? I mean, that's just, has it been kind of just kicking and screaming and trying to find it, or did you have some previous experience, one of you or both of you, that led to your ability to find these people that have that fluidity?
I think a lot of it, Jeff, comes from relationships, tapping our close network and the individuals that we've either worked with in the past or kind of warm intros or connections. So I think that's a huge key of what we're doing.
Of the 15 people.
Go ahead. But also I think, Jeff, we're all entrepreneurs, so we have that in our DNA, and we know what it takes to really, build businesses from scratch, and either, take it to an exit or, even fail. And, failure is a very important part of this entire process. And we really welcome people that, have failed in the past and have come back and succeeded. So, I think having, both myself, John, and Rodolfo being entrepreneurs ourselves, and having had that in our previous lives, and that having that understanding of starting businesses from scratch, kind of gives us kind of a good framework of what's needed to succeed here.
Yeah, people who embrace a test and iterate type of approach, of which failure is going to happen a lot.
Right.
So
absolutely.
What does the hiring process look like that leads you to be able to pinpoint those people, even when, to John's point, they're referred to by someone or perhaps one day you're going to run out of people that how do you identify someone that has those characteristics?
I mean, that's, let's say to identifying the leadership for portfolio companies, in my view, is the biggest bottleneck that we have. That is why in our model, we're not looking to launch 15, 20 companies a year, but we're looking to launch 3 to 5 a year, right? Because we want to make sure that we're identifying the highest caliber individual that we're able to within, and honestly, so far, it's been our network. I mean, we do have a very powerful network, and that keeps on growing, and it's global. So we've been able to identify, incredible leaders for really all the companies, not only in the U.S., but we do have one of our CEOs is based in Shanghai. So we have, company CEOs that are based in San Francisco, New York, Columbus, Ohio, and in Shanghai. So it's really becoming a global operation.
Once you get those names from those folks, what does the recruiting process look like in terms of assessing to make sure that the individual will fit the specific role? So they may be a very talented person, but perhaps they're not specifically suited to that role. Do you use a traditional interview process, or is it something different?
Well, look, I come, my background, I worked at Goldman, and, for me to get hired at Goldman, I went through 50 interviews. So, that kind of process is something that we do. All the partners interview someone, but at the end of the day, you kind of need to date before you get married. So, we've used that mentality quite often where, where we have someone that we think could be, a strong, very qualified individual to come in and run, one of the businesses. I mean, we usually have a structure where there's a cliff where we really test out the relationship for the next 3 months or so, or 6 months or so, to be able to see if there's a fit. And if there's a fit, then we can walk away. I mean, so far, we've been very lucky from that perspective, where, the interview process and really getting to know the people has made it so we've made the right, the correct hire. So we haven't had an issue with any of our CEOs departing.
How do you structure that? Is that, so they're basically full-time employees, but after 6 months, what happens?
Well, usually the key here is when equity begins to really vest, right? Because until that point, then you're dating, and it's no longer, once, the equity begins to vest, then it becomes a marriage, right? So, we always allow for that time frame where that dating occurs before you get that full-on marriage. Got it.
I understand. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was just going to also add, Jeff, another key element is full transparency. When you're working with such experienced individuals, we have such an open dialogue about the startup process, about how much flexibility is needed, how many things are going to be changing, and how much is undefined. And so when we continue to have that open conversation, it creates an environment that they can continue to work with us. And, it's not this combative relationship. It's how can we actually figure this out together?
Yeah. Right. How do you handle a situation where someone in your network refers a candidate to you, swears by them up and down, you assess that individual, or maybe your team assesses the individual, only to find out they're not the right person for the job? How do you delicately handle that? Because it happens to me a lot, and I think it happens to a lot of our listeners. Their board or their VC introduces them to someone who's not the right person.
Nothing better than being truthful and transparent. I think that, we value that quite a bit, and we've had situations where introductions occurred and we just went back and said, look, we really appreciate the introduction, but it wasn't a good fit. And I think that as long as you're keeping it, on a full transparency level and open dialogue, I think it's fine.
Got it.
And I think you're hitting on culture, and there's nothing more important than protecting our culture and protecting, kind of the environment to be able to execute and have open discussion.
Do you have a plan where folks in the studio would go with the new venture as it's kind of birthed into the world, and you would backfill them? Or is the intent that the team in the studio or the nursery stays together and you always hire for the portfolio companies?
No, we had situations where, let's say a lead project manager, just truly did such a great job and felt so passionate about the company that it really, to become the CEO. That's the example of Nicola Labs is a great example like that. Will Zell was actually our EIR and decided to step down and take on the challenge of running Nicola full time.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, Flavio, I think it was you, that this is really your biggest constraint, right? To being able to spin out these companies is finding great people. What do you, other than harvesting your network, which I understand, what else, if anything, have you guys put in place to build a pipeline to attract more talent ahead of the need?
Well, we've been very active on social media, but to be very honest with you, that has not worked out, very well. I'm a firm believer, Jeff, of relationships, and I think that an introduction is worth a lot more than just any cold contact. Yeah. We've so far, not only for the CEOs, but also for the positions within the nursery itself, the great majority has come through introductions or coming out and being just very open with the overall network. We've tried, different, social media platforms, but very honestly, we have not been successful on that.
Out of curiosity for the listeners, so they can learn from this, what did you find? Did you find a lot of quantity, but the quality wasn't there, or vice versa? What was the issue?
I think it was, the quality wasn't what we're looking for, or, there wasn't a specific match with what we're in need of, right? So we ended up receiving, a ton of stuff, but at the end of the day, it wasn't there. I'm not saying that we won't be able to find someone through those platforms, but so far we've been able to like I said, identify and vet the different candidates through our internal network.
Got it.
Yeah. I think another big value is the relationships with the universities or the research institutions. So
Right.
we can recruit from within, let's say that researchers' students or, over at the certain entrepreneurial centers, we can have a relatively warm intro come through and help to fill some voids in our operation.
Got it. So it sounds like
These are deep tech businesses, right? So they're very specific on the engineering side. So like John said, I mean, having, in the case of Nicola, again, we've hired, 3 or 4 engineers out of the electro science labs. I mean, I think having that relationship with the labs themselves and the students and the PhDs that are working within that field has been invaluable.
Have you formalized some kind of employee referral program to incentivize the team to bring their Rockstar friends and colleagues, or is it kind of more informal?
In terms of incentivizing what way? In terms of bonus or?
No.
Or,
for employees to refer other potential employees, other candidates.
Yeah. I think it's more informal, Jeff. It's just been kind of happening naturally. When an engineer starts to become passionate about his work, he starts to share with his colleagues, and they get excited about deep technology, new innovation, especially throughout the Midwest. So there's a lot of excitement around the businesses.
Got it. I love the concept of the nursery analogy. It totally makes sense, and it's a very important gap that you're filling, right, between universities and these raw labs and the marketplace. So if you can figure out how to systematize this, including the people part of it, I think you'll have something pretty cool. How can people learn more about this or get in touch with you?
Yes, so check out our website, ecovecapital.com, IKOVE capital.com, and our contact details are on the site. And just feel free to reach out. We would love to talk a little more about what we're up to and share ideas.
Fantastic. John, Flavio, thank you so much for making the time, and congratulations on the birth and growth of this fantastic venture, and we look forward to following your progress.
Thanks very much. I appreciate for inviting us.